Hi everyone, welcome to the Masters of Asset Data series by Glider, where we talk to real masters of asset data who can teach us how to extract value from asset data by sharing real stories and their experience. My name is Lucas Cusack, and I've spent most of the last 20 years moving and exchanging asset data from various points in an asset's lifecycle, say from design to construction to operation, and have come to the conclusion that it's unnecessarily difficult and we're losing immense value and opportunity with each transaction. Within that 20 years, however, I've seen brilliant examples and pioneers who are helping to close the gap and transform or digitize our built environment. One such pioneer I've met and have with me today is Steven Boyd. Steven, can you please introduce yourself and speak a little bit about your impressive career and what has led you to where you are today?
Hi, Lucas. Hello, everyone. I'm Steven Boyd. These days, I'm a non-executive strategic advisor, consultant working in built environment. Previously, was head of the British Army State and also the chief executive of the Government Property Agency. I was as an engineer. I've always been interested in numbers and data. When I was serving in the military, I got involved in engineer intelligence and gathering information and data that you can make decisions on. And over the last 10 years, in particularly the Government Property Agency, got really involved in how to use data to make better decisions. And other like you, Lucas, at times got quite frustrated that I couldn't get the data that I wanted in smooth ways. So whilst there are some great success stories, there are also some things where you think, oh, really could do that a bit better, couldn't we?
Okay, and so how important was good data then to you in some of the examples that you've sort of briefly given there, and for you and the people that you were working for or working with?
Good data is really important, but it's not so much really about the data. It's about the insights that you get from the data, and then how you use those insights to make decisions to get to business outcomes. I always like to think about this, the other way around, starting at the right-hand side and working backwards. So what are the business outcomes you want to achieve? What decisions we're going to make that are going to enable those outcomes? Insights are going to help us make those decisions, and then the data we need to gather. Because you could gather an awful lot of data, and a lot of it would be interesting, but not necessarily useful. So focusing, some kind of real focus on, we need this data to make these decisions so we can get to these outcomes. That's the focus that I try to.
So could you give us an example of like business objectives that were heavily reliant or more so reliant on good data or data in general?
Well, let me give you one from my time at the GPA. Objective to reduce the amount of space that was being used for offices in central London. When I arrived at the agency, there were 84 actual government offices in London, in the Zone 1 area. That just felt like a lot. Well, let's see if we can get better value for money. There's an objective, but also let's see if we can make the environment better for the people who are working there, so they can be happier, more productive. And in the end, we should be able to get, or my previous organisation should be able to get to really accurate occupancy measurement. But just to start with, how many people do you have in your organisation and how much space have you got? There's two really basic data sets. Let's gather that and make some decisions on the basis of that. And, it was immediately clear that there was quite a lot more space than was necessary. And yes, there was help with an increased hybrid working as a result of COVID. And yes, also some moving of roles from central London out to the regions as part of the levelling up agenda. But nonetheless, massive reduction in space. By the time that I left the GPA towards the end of 2023, with less than 40 buildings, so more than a 50% reduction in the number of offices reduced, and on track to be less than 20. So significant reduction in space, significant reduction in cost, significant reduction in carbon emissions, without compromising the ability for people to work in a really effective way. There's a really good example, I think, of a link between objective and just a couple of simple data points.
Yeah, and I can imagine like what those data points were. Like, were there challenges in getting that data and and knowing how accurate it was? Because obviously, you're on a pretty large scale. It's not like you can go in and physically inspect the buildings yourself or talk to every individual building manager. You had to rely on like masses of information coming in. Was there a way that you could be certain that it was correct? And yeah, were there any challenges in actually getting it in the
So,
first place?
look, getting data is always harder than you think it's going to be. And in general terms, people talk about, good data and clean data. I suppose what they mean is that it's complete, got all the data points that you need, and that they're accurate, and they're also timely. Great if you could always have 100% complete, 100% accurate, and just on time, but that's never quite the case. And you're always in some state of uncertainty, but making the best decision you can with the data that's available, that's what good data is about.
Yeah. And I imagine like in an exercise like that, there's going to be a lot of people pulling data for you for that specific purpose. And then now you've got it. And I imagine it's come from different silos and it's put somewhere temporarily for you to use. Long term, that's not sustainable, right? Like you want to be able to act on that data and then look at it in 2 weeks' time and say, what's changed?
Yeah.
So was that a challenge as well to make that information that's come in more fluid and
Yeah.
live?
So looking at that journey, I think is quite a good example. So you can start with, simple Excel spreadsheet. How many people in our organization and how much space do you have? Developing over time to much more accurate ways of gathering occupancy data. And that might include swipe cards as you enter a building. It might include the connection to Wi-Fi AP points in the building. It might include sensor connection with the building or within the building. And obviously that's much more accurate and more timely. In each one of those methods, and probably half a dozen other methods too, got their own pros and cons. But when you start to bring information from multiple sources together, with some view on how confident you bring those together, you'll never get 100% accurate or complete picture, but you will be able to say, look, here are some trends. Here is some information. Here is something we can make a decision on. Give you I wouldn't want to stick with occupancy for the whole of our conversation this afternoon, but just talking about another example there, working for MRC, having to do with your taxes, Lucas. When I was working with HMRC, I was approached by the IT team who said, look, our space in Canary Wharf, we had a large tower in Canary Wharf, is just big enough. We were breaking at the seams, our people are all unhappy and they're very unproductive. So we need to give us more space. We had some quite good data from that space on occupancy, and we're able to say, look, we measure every day, every 15 minutes occupancy. We've got a peak occupancy target, an average occupancy target. And I was able to tell them that despite their anecdote, but the reality was maximum peak had never got even to the target average. In fact, the space wasn't full. In fact, what particularly was empty. They could reduce the amount of space they were using. We could reduce cost to the organisation. Still have a really great looking environment. And they were kind of surprised, where did you get that data from? Actually, we got it from your Wi-Fi. It enabled a good decision to be made.
Okay, interesting. And we can go on to other examples, and I've got another question for you. But I was thinking your, I guess, goal there was to look at uses or occupants for the building. If it was a building that had like where you wanted to look specifically of where they were, so if you could reduce like the stories that they're on or the levels that you're occupying, was that data available, or would it be?
So mixed picture. So as it happens, that particular building at that time had our best data. Many other buildings, lot less good data, and I think that's the same in a built environment. You're always going to have to accept in the legacy space, the existing estate space, that there's a mixed level of data. And whilst you'd like to work towards great data everywhere, that's probably never going to be the case. And that's something that is difficult for some to accept, particularly if you're starting from a project experience, new project, large capital works. The data is great, but you're starting from green field, and you know exactly what you're doing. So it's great and easy in a way to gather fantastic data on a new project, but in an existing estate, say 30, 40 buildings, you'll have some that are brand new where you've got good data, and others which might be 20, 30, maybe 100 years old, where even their drawings are missing somewhere along the way. So having that variety of data standards and being comfortable with that, and then trying to get to a minimum viable data set that you can to make the decisions you need. And that takes time, takes focus. Perhaps we can talk about some of the ways to help to get to a good set of data.
I was alluding to that with the. I'm sorry to cut across you because you went exactly where I sort of expected you to, and that is, you're going to get different fidelity or levels of data from different assets. So like a new building can have loads and loads of data, and an old one has less. And like you were just saying, if you start with a baseline, your baseline's probably only going to be as good as your least smartest building, would you say? And then you would have a plan to say, okay, I need to fill the gaps. I need to like get from here, which is like quite simple, to some level on my very smartest building here. And like, so what are those gaps that I need to fill? And that's for people watching, like an example could be like, if I want to know how many people are using meeting rooms across my estate, well, that's like a more granular sort of level. But yeah, we can move on from occupancy, but yeah.
So that I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, because yes, some buildings will be pretty poor in terms of the amount and quality of data. That doesn't mean to say you can't make great decisions on all the other buildings where you've got much better data. So it's not really the weakest building is setting the standard across the board. It's more average quality that you've got. The whole of the battle, there are lots of people issues in getting there. So, you need to have somewhere where you can put your data. That's kind of a technical issue. You want to store it and hold it. But to begin with, at least people won't trust the data. And that probably means that they won't use it. They probably say they use it, but they might not. They've probably got their own little secret spreadsheet where they've got their own local, much better from their point of view data. Yeah. It might be better, but it's local and it's different. So it's really important to get to a single version of the truth, persuade people to turn off, throw away their little local spreadsheets, and invest time and effort in the central data set. You can support that by things like tracking the number of active users that are logging in to the data set every day. Right. You might have 100 people who say, oh, we use this every day, it's brilliant, it's what we use. But when you look at the number of active users, actually it's 10, because they're not using it, they're doing something else. So getting people to commit to that, and as the quality of the data improves and more people are using it, and if it's set up in such a way that it's helping people to do their jobs, and confidence builds and quality builds, it's quite easy to get into a spiral of lack of trust and people stopping using it. So it's something that you have to be on the whole time. But it's worthwhile doing that because you've got the right data, the right quality, the right time, get great insights. And from great insights, you get to great decisions, and then you get the outcomes you want.
Okay. You've changed my mind a bit there. I always used to sort of think you would, as an estate, you could be limited by your least smartest building, but so in getting this data, like you've mentioned a few things there, like where you've sort of seen insights in things. Have you ever like collected data and found something that you weren't looking for?
That's a good question. I'm sure that's the case. I'm not sure I can think of any examples now, but you certainly find things that you weren't expecting. You go about collecting data, and sometimes it proves what you thought. Sometimes it's quite surprising. But the good thing, as I was referring to before, is having that evidence. Without evidence in a built environment, it very often becomes management by anecdote. The heating wasn't very good last week, and therefore everything is terrible. Well, first of all, heating might or might not have been good last week, and data can show that. And secondly, it might prove that, well, it wasn't good last week on one day for a couple of hours in the afternoon, but actually for the whole rest of the winter it was fine. And when you can start to say 98% success, rather than focusing on the anecdote that's usually based around the 1 or 2% where it wasn't great, and there's always going to be some of that, that's a much better place to be. And without data, you can't argue against management by anecdotes, and that distracts people who are helping to manage a building, manage the assets, distracts them into dealing with sometimes real issues, but sometimes also non-issues.
Well, let's move on to probably slightly what you might consider more boring data. And I, before we started recording, I mentioned that I've moved house, and I remember exchanging documents and having to like rifle through my files of like old building control certificates I'd received, and the owner of this place was doing the same thing. And I was thinking, I can't imagine how difficult that is when you've got like, say, 200 buildings that are, 1,000 years old collectively, and when you need to find that sort of information. So what's your experience there with just basic compliance and paperwork that needs to be kept?
Yeah, so listen, the Government Property Agency is a really good example of that. So been experiences in other parts of government where large numbers of buildings have transferred ownership on a single day, and that caused chaos with lack of information. So there was an intent right from the outset to transfer of buildings from the original owner to the Government Property Agency a bit at a time, and do that with proper due diligence. The due diligence for check documents as well as a range of other things. Some government organisations, some departments had really quite good data, and had very, very poor. No naming here, but lost contracts, lost documents. You will be sure about the size of the building. The collection of those documents and sometimes recreation or tracking down of the original documents will take a dedicated team quite some time. So even the process of bringing those assets, those buildings, into a central organisation focused on property and nothing else, not dealing with other essential parts of government's activity, but just focused on property, would allow the quality of documentation to be improved and to be gathered in one place. And that's a great start before you even get to other types of data. So it is a challenge. It's also a challenge to keep those things up to date.
Yeah.
It's, you have a new survey done, you have a new certificate, and those things have to be kept up to date. And so change control is a really important issue, because without the change control, data quickly gets out of date. Yeah. People start to lose trust in it. Then you're not sure whether you can make decisions because it might be out of date. Then we get back to the situation we were talking about before, where people start creating their own little spreadsheets.
Yeah. And is there a way to put like a cost on what the impact is? Like, I know it's very, very difficult to put an actual cost, but like surely it's a significant impact that you would say, wow, that cost us a lot of money. Like, what can we do to not be in this situation again?
It does cost a lot of money. I mean, the process that the Government Property Agency went through in gathering that data was costly in itself. The benefit of having all of that data in the right place and knowing that it was up to date and then keeping it up to date is considerable as a sort of business as usual start point. Beyond that, when you've got that information, you can start to make decisions about condition of buildings, when to invest, whether to invest, whether to hold an asset, whether to dispose of an asset. How do you invest in order to get not only an improvement in condition that supports the people working in the building, but also potentially to reduce utility use carbon emissions. So you get to a whole series of extra value add once you get to the baseline, which in itself brings value.
Okay. I'd like to maybe move on to other bits of tech, really. Like, we've seen a really good example of, like, data, time series data that can have an impact, and the importance of more regulatory and what you would call boring or just paperwork, which is super important. And in my experience, I've seen that comes up and is often ignored by some asset owners because they don't even realize it is a problem. But with the emergence of, like, a lot of tech now, like, something that's always on my mind, and because I've been in the industry for a while, is digital twins. Is emerging technologies like this that are sort of, and I'm not going to use the two-letter acronym yet, but is it pushing asset owners in the wrong direction when they should be looking at more of the important stuff, and they're focusing on, we want a digital twin, but they wanted a digital twin, but they don't even know where the documents are for their building. So, like,
I think there is.
What's your opinion on that?
Human nature is to look at the latest shiny thing. I think to have a digital twin. It'd be great to use AI in our buildings to be able to make predictive decisions, and those things are possible, and they're in some cases doable now, and in other cases not far into the future. In both those circumstances, you need a basis of decent data in order to be able to make a step forward. If you take AI, for instance, if you've got a basis of decent data, then AI can help you fill in the gaps, can help you make predictions, and you can start to move towards condition-based maintenance, use-based maintenance, predictive maintenance, all of which will save money and save carbon. If you look at digital twins, on the other hand, yes, you can get a lot of value out of many things like Internet of Things and buildings actually operating on in a real-time basis with dynamic data. That's all great and very doable. Before you put that performance twin to good use, you do need a physical twin that actually says, this is the size and shape of the building. It's got this many floors, this many rooms. This is how it works. And then you can overlay the performance twin on top of the asset twin, and then you get real value. So the technology is there to do these things today. You've got to have a foundational data before you move to that.
So that's music to my ears.
And you've also got to have a skill set to do it.
Yeah, no, definitely the way I'm thinking, in that, like, I've worked a lot with the performance analysis data, and they're telling you what something's doing, but they have very limited knowledge on what it actually is that's doing that. I think they've maybe taken a leap ahead, which is why I asked you the original question.
It's great that those things going forward in parallel. You're taking a sequential approach and saying, look, let's get really good quality of physical asset understanding first, and then we'll move on from there when we've done that to think about how our building operates with dynamic data. That's not necessary. Both aspects can be taken forward together, but effective use of both together does require a foundation of solid asset data.
You mentioned before predictive maintenance, and I find in my experience that term is not so much overused, but it's used a lot to describe something which I think is still a bit out of reach in terms of buildings that are maintaining themselves. Like, what's your opinion? Like, what's stopping us right now from having buildings that maintain themselves, or at least using predictive maintenance?
Buildings that maintain themselves is going a little bit too far, but certainly predictive maintenance, that's possible today, and it happens in a number of places. Let's be clear what we're talking about. We're not talking about predictive maintenance on all of the assets in the whole building or across the whole portfolio. That would be a massive task and probably not necessary. When you're talking about really high value assets, value in terms of they're expensive, and also value in terms of when they go wrong, they really annoy people, things like lifts and heating systems, a small number of assets, the headworks in a lift actually move the lift up and down, the chiller system, the heating system, those things, those assets can be monitored. On a simple basis of, is this bearing getting really hotter than it should be? How long is it being used for? That can lead to decisions to place, repair, upgrade, or not. Yeah. And predicting that those things need action before they do, without relying simply on a fixed time when the asset might not have been used or might not have been used anywhere near its full capacity, it gets to avoiding disruption to the customers, the end users of the building, and a better value for money, pushing or replacing or maintaining or checking when you don't need to check. So a reasonably small number of sensors focused on high value assets can get real value.
Convince me. Yeah, I think I've always just been too shy or modest. I don't know. I've referred to it as proactive maintenance because I just think predictive, maybe it's being a bit futuristic or going to scare people. But so, like, on that, you obviously quite passionate.
It's not predictive. Your phone can predict what words you're going to write next.
Yeah, right.
The technology is definitely there. It can predict that look, this is probably about time that you did something about this.
That's something like, I don't want to go off in the clouds talking about AI and large language models, but I know from what I do day to day and what I've seen, I know this sort of stuff is a possibility. So I will ask you, if you could create one piece of technology now for the built environment, just invent it out of thin air, that doesn't exist, that obviously relies on data, of course. What would it be?
I'm not sure I'd walk away from a magic wand on creating new technology, because I think there's plenty of good technology out there already.
What would you improve then?
I would definitely be looking at skills. Perhaps two things, if I may choose two things. Skills would be one, and the other one would be consistent approach to data standards. So there have been huge progress in the last 10 to 15 years with the way that data is used in design and construction. And that is pretty joined up, and there have been great advantages in productivity as a result. Pointing, I think, the progress that's being made in the asset management and facilities management space. and there's real opportunity to catch up there. And one of the challenges is skills. Another challenge is different data standards, which means that data created in a project phase is then lost when we get to project handover and doesn't land well in operations. You may see some of the documents that you referred to before have been transferred into a document management system or even SharePoint, but a lot of the detailed data will often be lost. And that's, well, it is a shame, but more importantly, it's a waste of time and a waste of resources, because then data has to be recaptured, revalidated, and real opportunities for through-life perspective lost, which particularly when it comes to carbon management, that ability to see through the whole life of an asset. I often say, look, it might take you 3 or 4 years to build an asset, but then it's going to be in use for 50 years. So, just by measuring the amount of time, it's quite important to get the operational phase right.
Yeah, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to capture the information, and it's sadly lost. I wish I could have taken you to every customer-client meeting I've ever had in the last 10 years to reiterate. I think they would listen to you more so than me. Because, you're really saying exactly like what I've been experiencing for a lot of the time in transacting information from one phase to the other. And I really like that you brought up skills as well, because a lot of the conclusions I've come now, it's people. Like, we talk about, are there better ontologies to generate smart building points, data points, for example, from construction? It's like, well, it's there, but like you can give the best, most detailed, accurate asset information model to an operator team, but they might not know how to use it. And they might not have been part of the journey in creating it, so they're not going to feel any ownership or incentive to really use it. Is it in their contract? So this idea of digital soft landings, I've sort of been like talking about lately, and I didn't realize it had a huge. I don't know. I mentioned to a few people and I thought, oh, that's a great term. But it's something that I just thought should accompany or go alongside soft landings anyway, because the soft landings process, there's a reason for it. And I think ensuring that the data also goes through and it lives up to the expectations that it was procured to do and it's used is super important.
I agree with you.
Maybe
the soft landing is really important, but just to pick up on what you're talking about there in procurement. So I think that we can have a different conversation on a different day about collaboration across the supply chain, but it's certainly true that the UK's built environment supply chain industry, the sector is quite fragmented. Whereas to get something done over the life of an asset, all the things done over the life of an asset, you need a series of different procurement activities and different contracts. And those contracts need to ask the relevant supplier for data and tell them, this is the data that I need, this type, this format, this standard, at this time, this is how I want you to demonstrate to me how the data you're providing is good quality. And by the way, this is how I'm going to audit you and how I'm going to assess your performance in providing data. If everybody in the whole supply chain, at every stage of the asset life, through all the somewhat fragmented industry, is providing the right types of data, then that makes a big difference. And, I've got real experience with that. I spent quite a lot of time talking to supply chain in some of my earlier roles about the importance of data and so on. Everybody nods and says, yes, that's the right thing to do. We're definitely on it. And our data is great. And wasn't really getting traction. Speak to the procurement team. What are you putting in the contracts about data? Well, we don't put anything in the contracts about data. No one ever asked.
Or like in my experience, like I've got in trouble because I'm telling people that they need to go and do all this stuff while we're 6 weeks behind program, and there's all these other things. It's like if you cause someone to like not work or slow progress on site, you're going to be in trouble, right? Like so the data was always the virtual was pushed aside in favor of the physical, which I get it, but somehow there needs to be a way that there's no which is better, which is more important. It's just both done in sync.
Yeah, so there's always going to be challenges, priorities of people's time. No, I get that. I think my point is that if you were to read a contract for a building designer, there'll be lots of detail in there about what data is to be provided in what way and how that's to be exchanged. But you won't find similar types of guidance in contracts that are let, for instance, with hard FM suppliers, which is kind of odd because they're dealing with the same asset. So, getting those requirements of the supply chain so everybody can pull together that's one way of helping the various parties to collaborate to a common aim.
I've got a couple more questions for you, and then I think we'll wrap up. And if we decide that there's loads more to talk about, we'll have more of these sessions. But still on the topic of skills and people, and I remember myself coming through the workforce, and I kept seeing things. I was like, that doesn't make sense. Why is that? That's bonkers. Like, and then you start getting used to it. And so like, two questions. Like, what advice would you give to the younger generation now that are entering the workforce, and they're going to now have the responsibility of managing a data-driven world?
So I would say that digital and data is everybody's job. It's part of everybody's role. We talked about the supply chain. It's part of every part of the supply chain. It's also part of the whole team's job. It's not, oh, well, there's the data guy over there. And, Lucas does the data. We don't need to worry about it. Everybody has to play their part. And so it's part of everybody's job. I'd also repeat some of the things that I mentioned before, that you don't need perfect data everywhere. You should focus on, here are the outcomes we want to achieve. These are the insights we need to get to achieve that. Right, let's focus on this data. And it might be that 20% of the total data that you could collect is going to get you 80% of the output. So, it's real focus on the minimum data sets that you
That's a great point.
Making decisions.
Someone like myself who's like got an attention to detail, sometimes you do feel stuck, and you just need to think, if it's 80% there, it's good enough. So importantly then, like, and I don't know where I fit into this, but in the aging workforce, apparently a lot of people in construction and particularly in FM and engineering, they're up in the years, and they might only have, like, say, 10, 15 years till retirement or even less. So what advice would you give to them? Because they've seen so much change, and I could imagine they'd just be exhausted. They just want to get on and do their job. So what advice would you give them?
And the way the world is, there'll be a lot more change, and probably the pace of that change will not slow down. So it's easy to say, well, embrace new ways of doing things, but I appreciate that's not easy, particularly when you've got a day job. I think the challenge is to try and make digital and data an opportunity as part of the day job, so that it is placing something you're doing already, rather than being yet another thing, another burden to add to your already busy day. So how can it be part of what you're doing already, and done well? Good support can actually make today's job a lot easier than it was before. It should be a time saver as well as a cost saver, not an additional burden. And going into those discussions about new ways of using data with that kind of mindset, easier said than done, but I think would help a lot.
Cool. I think we might wrap it up there. And it's always exciting to talk to you, Stephen. We have some good chats, and finally we've got to record this one, so we should have some more.
I'm not sure that's a good thing. Or not, might be used against us.
Yeah. So but now I just want to offer a massive thank you for your time and imparting some great stories that will hopefully inspire others in our sector and inspire them rather to join the movement and transform our industry. So and a massive thanks to Glider as well for making this possible and bringing us together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. See you.